We continue with our Holy Bible reading, part 27, Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 13. Laws concerning leprosy. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has a scar on the surface of his skin or a shiny spot, and it appears to be a leprous infection, he is to be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priests, and the priest shall examine the infection on the surface of his skin, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears deeper than the surface of his skin, it is a leprous infection. Thus the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the shiny spot on the surface of his skin is white, but appears to be no more than skin deep, and its hair has not turned white, but is dark, the priest shall quarantine him for 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and indeed, if the infection appears as it has not spread on the skin, the priest shall quarantine him another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and indeed, if the infection is dark and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a spot, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the spot happens to spread at all on the skin after he was seen by the priest for his cleansing, then he must be seen by the priest again. So if the priest sees the spot has indeed spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the leprous infection is on a man, he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the scar on the skin is white and has turned the hair white, and some of the flesh in the scar is healthy and alive, it is an old leprosy on the surface of the skin. The priest shall pronounce him unclean and shall quarantine him, for he is unclean. But if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and it covers from head to foot all the skin of the one with the infection, according to the full examination of the priest, then the priest shall consider, and indeed, if the leprosy covers the entire surface of his skin, he shall pronounce clean him who has the infection, because it all turned white. He is clean, but in whatever day an open wound appears on him, he shall be unclean. Thus the priest shall examine the open wound and pronounce him unclean. For an open wound is unclean, it is leprosy. But if the surface of the skin is restored and turns white again, he shall come to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the infection has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him clean. Him who has the infection, he is clean. If one's body develops an ulcer in the skin, and it is healed, and in the place of the ulcer there comes a white scar, or a shiny or inflamed spot, it shall be shown to the priest. When the priest sees it, and indeed it appears deeper than the skin, and its hair has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy which broke out in the ulcer. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there is no white hair in it, and it is not deeper than the skin's surface, but is dark, the priest shall quarantine him 7 days. But if it should spread over the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection which broke out in the ulcer. But if the shiny spot stays in one place and has not spread, it is the scar of the ulcer, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if one's body receives a burn on its skin by fire, and the open wound of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, the priest shall examine it. And indeed, if the hair of the bright spot has turned white and it appears deeper than the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in the bright spot, and it is not deeper than the skin, but is dark, then the priest shall quarantine him 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and if it has all spread over the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection broken out in the ulcer. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread on the skin, but is dark, it is a scar from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man or woman appears to have a leprous infection on the head or the beard, the priest shall examine the infection, and indeed, if it appears deeper than the skin, then there is thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous lesion, a leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines the infection of the lesion, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, then there is no thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall quarantine him 7 days, and the one who has the infection of the lesion. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the infection, and indeed, if the lesion has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the indentation does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the lesion. Then the priest shall quarantine another 7 days the one who has this lesion. On the 7th day the priest shall examine the lesion, and indeed, if the lesion has not spread over the skin, and the indentation does not appear deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the lesion happens to spread at all on the skin after his cleansing, the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the lesion has spread over the skin, the priest need not seek for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the lesion appears to be at a standstill, and there is a black hair growing up in it, the lesion has healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, specifically shining white spots, the priest shall look, and indeed, if the bright spots on the skin of the body are shining white spots, it is eczema. He is clean. As for the man whose hair has fallen from his head, he is bald, but he is clean. He whose hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on the forehead, but he is clean. Now, if there is on the bald head or bald forehead a reddish white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the infection of the reddish white skin on his head, on his bald head or on his bald forehead is like the form of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His infection is on his head. Now the clothes of the leper on whom the infection is shall be torn, and his head uncovered, and he shall cover his mouth, and he shall be called unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has the infection he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell apart. His way of life shall be outside the camp. Laws concerning leprous garments. Also, if a garment has a leprous infection in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or wool or woof of linen or wool, whether a leather or in anything made of leather, and if the infection is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether in the warp or in the wool or in the woof or in anything made of leather, then it is a leprous infection and shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the infection and quarantine him who has the infection 7 days. Then he shall examine the infection on the 7th day. If the infection has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, in the leather or in anything made of leather, the infection is an active leprosy. It is unclean. Therefore he shall burn the garment with the infection, whether the warp or woof in wool or linen, or in anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy. The garment shall be burnt in the fire. Or if the priest examines it, and indeed the infection has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything made of leather, then the priest shall order that the object with the infection be washed, and he shall quarantine it another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine the infection after it is washed, and indeed if the infection has not changed its color, though the infection has not spread, it is unclean. It shall be burned in the fire, for it is firmly established in the garment, either in the warp or the woof. If the priest examines it, and indeed the infection is dark after washing it, he shall tear it out of the garment, whether out of the warp or the woof or the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or the woof or anything made of leather, it is a spreading leprosy, and the garment with the infection shall be burnt with fire. But if you wash the garment, either warp or woof or anything made of leather, and the infection disappears from it, then it shall be washed a 2nd time, and shall be clean. This is the law of the leprous infection in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Chapter 14. Laws of purification for healed lepers. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper. For the day of his cleansing, he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the leper's infection is healed in the leper, the priest shall give orders to take for the one declared clean 2 small birds, live and clean, and also cedar wood and scarlet and hyssop. Then the priest must give orders that one of the birds be killed in the earthen vessel over running water. And as for the living bird, he shall take it and the cedar wood, the scarlet and hyssop, and dip them in the living bird in the blood of the bird killed over the running water. Then he shall sprinkle the water 7 times on the one cleansed from his leprosy, and he shall be clean. Then he shall send away the living bird, bird into a field. And the one who was cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and wash himself in water, and he shall be clean. After this he shall come into the camp, and shall stay outside his tent 7 days. But on the 7th day he shall shave all the hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. All his hair he shall shave off. He shall wash his clothes and wash his body in water, and he shall be clean. Then on the 8th day he shall take 2 one-year-old lambs without blemish, a 1-year-old sheep without blemish, 3/10 of the finest wheaten flour for a grain offering and mixed with oil, and also 1 cup of oil. Then together with these things the priest who cleanses shall present before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of testimony the man to be made cleansed. The priest shall then take 1 lamb and offer it as a trespass offering into the cup of oil, and set them apart as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he shall kill the lamb in the place where he kills the sin offering and the whole burnt offering in a holy place. For as the sin offering is the priest's, so is the trespass offering. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall also take some of the oil from the cup and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. Then he shall dip his right finger in the oil in his left hand, and sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest shall then put some of the remaining oil on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and also on the thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the trespass offering. Then the priest shall put the rest of the oil on the head of the one to be cleansed. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. Afterwards the priest shall offer the sin offering, and by it make atonement for the one to be cleansed. Then he shall kill the whole burnt offering. The priest shall offer the whole burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar before the Lord. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean. But if he is poor and cannot afford it, he shall take 1 lamb, a choice portion, for a trespass offering, along with 1/10 of fine flour mixed with oil and a cup of oil as a grain offering, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. One shall be a sin offering and the other a burnt offering, to make atonement for him. He shall bring them to a priest on the 8th day for his cleansing, to the door of the tabernacle of testimony before the Lord. The priest shall take the lamb of the trespass offering and the cup of oil and put them as a deposit before the Lord. Then the priest shall kill the lamb of the trespass offering and take some of its blood, and put it on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, then on the thumb of his right hand, and the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall then pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and sprinkle with his right finger, some of the oil in his left hand 7 times before the Lord. And then the priest shall put some of the oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and also on the thumb of his right hand and the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the trespass offering. The rest of the oil in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. After this he shall offer 1 of the turtle doves or young pigeons, such as he can afford. One is a sin offering, and the other is a whole burnt offering. with the grain offering. Thus the priest shall make atonement for the one to be cleansed before the Lord. This is a law for one who has a leprous infection, who cannot afford the usual cleansing. Laws concerning leprous houses. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When you enter the land of Canaan, which I give you as a possession, and I put the leprous infection in a house in the land of your possession, and he who owns the house comes and tells the priest, saying, It seems to me there is an infection in my house, then before the priest goes into the house to examine the infection, he shall give orders for them to empty the house, that everything in the house may not become unclean. Afterwards the priest shall enter the house to examine it. He shall examine the infection, and indeed if the plague on the walls of the house is greenish or reddish, depressions that appear to be deep in the walls, then the priest shall go outside the house to the door of the house and quarantine the house 7 days. After this the priest shall come again on the 7th day to examine, and indeed if the infection has spread on the walls of the house, then the priest shall give orders to take away the stones with the infection, and they shall cast them into the unclean place outside the city. They shall then scrape the house inside and outside, and the dust they scrape off they shall pour out in an unclean place outside the city. Then they shall take other scraped stones and put them in the place of those stones, and they shall take other mortar and plaster the house. Now if the infection comes back and breaks out in the house, after they took away the stones and scraped and plastered the house, then the priest shall enter the house to examine it, and indeed if the infection has spread in it, there is an act of leprosy in the house, it is unclean. So they shall break down the house, its stones, timber, and all its plaster, and carry them outside the city to an unclean place. Moreover, he who goes into the house at all while it is quarantined shall be unclean until evening. Also, the one who lies down in the house shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening, and the one who eats in the house shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. But if the priest enters the house to examine it, and indeed the infection has not spread at all in the house after it was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce it clean, because the infection is healed. Then to cleanse the house he shall take 2 live birds, cedarwood, scarlet, and hyssop, and he shall kill one of the birds in the earthen vessel over running water, and he shall take the cedarwood and hyssop and scarlet and the living bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. Thus he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird and running water, and the living bird along with the cedarwood, the hyssop, and the spun scarlet. Then he shall send away the living bird into a field outside the city to make atonement for the house, and it shall be clean. This is a law for any leprous infection and lesion, and for the leprous garment, a house, a scar, a mark, and a bright spot, to determine in which day there is the unclean, and in which day it will be declared clean. This is the law of leprosy. Chapter 15. Laws concerning bodily discharges. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, To any and every man, when any man has a seminal discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. This shall be the law of his uncleanness, whether his bodily member flows with an involuntary discharge of semen, or is stopped up by his discharge, it is his uncleanliness. Every bed on which he also who has the discharge lies is unclean, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything on which he who has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the skin of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any saddle of a donkey on which he who has a discharge rides shall be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything under him shall be unclean until evening. And whoever carries any of those things shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whomever he who has the discharge touches and has not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. As earthen vessel that he who has a discharge, an earthen vessel that he who has a discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. Now when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing. He shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, then he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring these before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of testimony, and give them to the priest. Then the priest shall offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a whole burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord because of his discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, he shall wash all his body in water, and be unclean until evening. Any garment and any leather on which there is semen shall be washed with water, and be unclean until evening. Also when a woman lies with a man, and there is an emission of semen, they shall bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual period 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on during her menstruation shall be unclean. Also everything she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If anything is on her bed, or on anything which she sits, and when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. If any man lies with her, and her uncleanness is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than at the time of her menstruation, or if it runs beyond its time, all the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her menstruation, and whatever she sits on, it shall be unclean as the uncleanliness of her menstruation. Whoever touches her shall be unclean, and he shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. On the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of testimony. The priest shall offer one as a sin offering, and the other as a whole burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord because of the discharge of her uncleanness. Thus you shall make the children of Israel ungodly because of their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle among them. This is a law for one who has a discharge and who emits semen, and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her menstrual period, and for one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for the man who lies with her during her menstrual period. Day of Atonement, chapter 16. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, when they offered strange fire before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place, inside the veil, in the presence of my mercy seat at the ark of the testimony, lest he die, for I will be seen in the cloud above the mercy seat. Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the young bull of the oxen as a sin offering, and a ram as a whole burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments, therefore he shall wash his body in water, and put them on. Then he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goat of a sin offering, and 1 ram as a whole burnt offering. Aaron shall offer the young bull as his sin offering to make atonement for himself and his house. He shall take 2 kids and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of testimony. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 kids, 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the kid on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering, but the kid on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord, to make atonement upon it, to let it go as a scapegoat into the desert. Then Aaron shall offer the young bull as a sin offering, to make atonement for himself and his house. Then he shall kill the young bull as his sin offering. He shall then take a censerful of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, with his hands full of the incense compound beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. He shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat on the testimonies, lest he die. He shall take some of the young bull's blood with his finger and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. After that he shall kill the kid of the sin offering before the Lord on behalf of the people, and bring some of its blood inside the veil, to do with that blood as he did with the blood of the young bull, and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. So he shall make atonement in the holy place because of the impurities and injustices of the children of Israel, for all their sins. And thus he shall do this in the tabernacle of testimony, built among them in the midst of their uncleanliness. There shall be no man in the tabernacle of testimony when he goes in to make atonement in the holy place, until he comes out, that he may make atonement for himself, his household, and all the congregation of the children of Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar before the Lord and make atonement upon it, and he shall take some of the blood of both the young bull and the kid, and put it on the horns of the altar all around. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood upon it with his finger 7 times, and cleanse and sanctify it because of the impurities of the children of Israel. The scapegoat. When Aaron shall finish making atonement in the holy place, the tabernacle of testimony, and the altar, and shall also cleanse matters concerning the priests, then he shall bring the living kid. Aaron shall place his hands on the head of the living kid, confess over it all the transgressions of the children of Israel, and all their lawlessness and all their sins, and he shall put them on the head of the living kid, and send it away into the desert by the hands of a suitable man. The kid shall wear on itself all their wrongdoings to an uninhabited land. Then he shall send away the kid into the desert. Then Aaron shall come into the tabernacle of testimony, and take off the linen garments he put on when he went into the holy place, and he shall leave them there. He shall then wash his body with water in a holy place, put on his garments, and come out to offer his whole burnt offering, and the whole burnt offering of the people, to make atonement for himself, his house, the people, and in matters concerning the priests. The fat of the sin offering he shall offer on the altar. He who sent away the kid which was set apart for remission shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. The young bull and the kid for the sin offerings, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp, and they shall burn them in the fire. Their skin, their flesh, their offal, and he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. Ordinances for the Day of Atonement. This shall be an ordinance forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall humble your souls, and do not work at all, whether a native of your own country or a resident alien who dwells among you, for on that day the priest shall make atonement for you, to cleanse you from all your sins before the Lord. Thus you shall be clean. It is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, a rest for you, and you shall humble your souls. It is an ordinance forever. So the priest who is anointed and consecrated to minister as priest in his father's place shall make atonement, and put on the linen clothes, the holy garments. Then he shall make atonement in the most holy place, the tabernacle of testimony, and the altar, and he shall make atonement for matters concerning the priests and all the congregation. So this shall be an ordinance forever for you, to make atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins, and he shall do this once a year, as the Lord gave orders to Moses. And then we go to Luke, and we continue with chapter 7. The Gentile soldier's faith. Now he concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people. He entered Capernaum, and a certain centurion's servant, who was dear to him, was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders to the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue." When Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you, but say a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, "I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel." And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick. A widow's son is raised. Now it happened the day after that he went into the city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a deaf man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. Then the Lord saw her, and he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judah and all the surrounding region. John's messengers inquire of Jesus. Then the disciples of John reported to him concerning all these things, and John called 2 of his disciples to him, sent them to Jesus, saying, "Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?" Then the men had come to him. They said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?'" And that very hour he cured many of infirmities, afflictions, evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and tell John the things you have seen and heard, that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me." When the messengers of John had departed, he began to speak to the multitudes concerning John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who are gorgeously apparelled and live in luxury are in king's courts. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.' For I say to you, among those born of women, there is not a greater prophet than John the Baptist. But he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." And when all the people heard him, even the tax collectors justified God, having been baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and lawyers rejected the will of God for themselves, not having been baptized by him. And the Lord said, "To what then shall I liken the men of this generation, and to what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another, saying, 'We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned to you, and you did not weep.' For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you said, 'He has a demon.' The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, 'Look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is justified by all her children." Forgiveness of a sinful woman. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears, and wiped them with her hair of their head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who touched him, for she is a sinner." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." So he said, Teacher, say it. There was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Simon answered and said, I suppose the one he forgave more, to the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, You have rightly judged. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Then he said to her, Your sins are forgiven. And those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, Who is this who even forgives sins? And then he said to the woman, Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Luke chapter 8, Women who served God. Women who served Jesus. Now it came to pass afterward that he went through every city and village, preaching and teaching the glad tidings of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with him, and certain women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, out of whom had come 7 demons, and Joanna the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who provided for him from their substance. Parable of the sower. And when a great multitude had gathered, and they had come to him from every city, he spoke in a parable. The sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trampled down, and the birds of the air devoured it. Some fell on rock, and as soon as it sprung up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. And some fell among the thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. But others fell on good ground, sprung up, and yielded a crop 100-fold. When he had said these things, he cried, He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Then his disciples asked him, saying, What does this parable mean? And he said, To you it has been given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to the rest it is given in parables, that, seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not understand. Now the parable is this: the seed is the word of God. Those by the wayside are the ones who hear, and the devil comes, takes the word away out of their heart, lest they should believe and be saved. But the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear, receive the word with joy, and these have no root, who believe for a while, and in a time of temptation fall away. Now the ones that fell among thorns are those who, when they have heard, go out and are choked with cares, riches, and pleasures of life, and bring no fruit to maturity. But the ones that fell on the good ground are those who have heard the word and with a noble and good heart keep it and bear fruit with patience. Take care how you hear. No one, when he has lit a lamp, covers it with a vessel or puts it under a bed, but sets it on a lampstand, that those who enter may see the light. For nothing is secret that will not be revealed, or anything hidden that will not be known and come to light. Therefore take heed how you hear, for whoever has, to him more will be given. And whoever does not have, even what he seems to have, will be taken from him. Jesus' true kinsman. Then his mother and brothers came to him and could not approach him because of the crowd. And it was told him by some who said, Your mother and your brothers are standing outside desiring to see you. But he answered and said to them, My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it. Jesus calms a storm. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into the boat with his disciples, and he said to them, Let us cross over to the other side of the lake. And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water, and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and raging of the water, and they ceased. And there was a calm. But he said to them, Where is your faith? And they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, "Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and water, and they obey him." The Gadarene demoniac. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee, and when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds, and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go into the abyss. Now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain, so they begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. When those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They also who had seen it told them by what means he who had been demon-possessed was healed. Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear, and he got into the boat and returned. Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you." And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Jairus' daughter raised, and a woman healed. So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged around him, and now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment. And immediately her flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me, for I perceive power going out of me." Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, "Do not weep, she is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Then her spirit returned, and she rose immediately, and he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. And we'll continue with our reading tomorrow. God bless you. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not certainly on not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.